Welcome everybody to this episode of O365A, and this is part 2 of Team Security and Compliance. And tonight we're going to talk about sensitivity labels. And joining us back from part 1 is Joanne Klein, Microsoft Office and Apps MVP, like all of us, and she's Canadian. Welcome, Joanne, and maybe I'll just turn the floor over to you, do a little intro, and we'll jump right into sensitivity labels.
Sure. Hi, thanks everyone. Good to be here again, talking about now sensitivity labels, what I work on with customers in this area, some different kind of issues we run into, some things to focus on. So looking forward to the chat tonight.
Awesome. So welcome back, Joanne. Happy to have you. So I guess you're ready for round 2 of rapid fire questions from the team.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. So maybe you can just explain, or maybe even just level set, with the audience as far as what the difference is between sensitivity labels and Teams classifications, and where would you use each?
Sure. They both apply a level of protection and work together, but you can in fact publish them or deploy them separately if you want. And that's in fact what some organizations do. So you can apply once you've figured out what your data classification schema is, and you've mapped that into a taxonomy, if you will, that you define through a sensitivity label, you can apply some controls with that. So at the file and email level, at the very granular level, you can apply things like a watermark, kind of visual markings on the document to indicate to an end user visually that, hey, there's something unique about this document. It maybe is confidential, top secret, etc. And then if required, you can put on some protection controls. So you can apply encryption, which will limit the permissions on who can have access to that document and what they can do when they do have access to it. So there's lots going on behind the scenes. The clicking of the boxes to set all these things up are fairly straightforward. It's all of the legwork that happens in advance of creating those sensitivity labels for files and emails. That's where all of the work comes in. And then Teams classifications is still using sensitivity labels, but approaching it from at the container level or at the Teams level, also a SharePoint site level, or really anything with a unified group behind it. What kind of controls do we want to allow at that? And the biggest ones are, do you want to allow guest access in there? Do you want to allow external sharing? And if so, what level of external sharing? What do you want to do about unmanaged devices hitting that location? And kind of the privacy of the team. And there's some additional functionality Microsoft is pushing out as well. So these two controls at the Teams level and at the file and email level really work hand in hand when you have them together, and provide, I think, a holistic kind of protection story on your content in your Teams. Yeah.
Awesome. So that being said, maybe you can give us a little bit of a demo on implementing sensitivity labels.
Sure. I will pull up one of my test tenants to show some of this, or a demo tenant rather.
And as Joanne brings that up, I seem to remember implementing sensitivity labels in my tenant, and there's a bunch of prerequisites you have to do, right, in terms of setting them up.
Yeah, I mean emails. There's another Azure AD PowerShell commandlet you have to actually Exchange Online PowerShell commandlet you have to do to be able to scope labels at the container level, so at a site or a unified group, which in this tenant, and what you're looking at here, I'm in the Microsoft Purview Center in information protection, which is where you define sensitivity labels. And this is just what came with the demo tenant. I haven't added any of these. So this is a good place to start if you want to figure out what some of these controls mean. And as you can see, this little gray bar is telling me I, in fact, haven't enabled the feature to create sensitivity labels for teams, sites, and groups. And I did it through PowerShell about now 15 minutes ago, but it takes a while for it to propagate down here. I'm actually going to refresh the page and see if that bar goes away, because I would like to demo what those options are when you're creating a sensitivity label. And if not, I can just talk to them.
We just have to wait a Microsoft minute.
A Microsoft minute, yeah, which I think in this case, it's supposed to be within an hour, I think, but I could have that wrong. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new label. Let's call it top secret. I'm going to stop as I go along here. Label names are really important. First of all, if you have any multilingual requirements, this is your primary language. You have to do all of the other languages via PowerShell. And I think it's a JSON file, I believe. Display name is, you can change this after the fact if you want. If you have migrated these labels from the classic Azure Information Portal, you're likely going to see a GUID up here in the name on the labels that have been migrated, and then you can, and then the friendly display name. Description for users, really important. This is, unless you're auto applying every sensitivity label, sometimes when the user hovers over the label, and I'll show you what that looks like, this is really all they have to go on should I use this label for this content. So spend a lot of time on this. That's all I can say. So, and then this is just, back-end administrative stuff. In the classic portal and in the, there's a couple of different clients. So when you're in Word, there's a couple different clients you can have for interacting with the sensitivity labels. And I'm happy to say that the built-in client, which is typically what I recommend to organizations now, has now brought in the color, which is pretty important when you're dealing with something that interfaces with an end user. That traffic light protocol is often done with blue, green, amber, red for the different progressively increasing sensitivity. So good to see that's in here right now. So I'll just select purple. So you have to scope a label, and this is what I was talking about on the initial question, was you can either do it at the item level only, or you can sensitivity label that covers both an item and the group and the site, i.e. a team. Some organizations actually do two different sets of labels for this. I've seen both sides, and people have very strong opinions about that. I think the biggest reason they like to separate them is the description that you see when you're creating when you're trying to apply a sensitivity label to a team or a site. Needs to make sense for when you're creating a team or a site. And if it has a description in there talking about file sensitivity, it doesn't really make sense. So I've seen that done both ways. Now, because I haven't enabled this on this tenant, or it hasn't percolated down to this area yet, this option is grayed out. So when I create a sensitivity label at the item level, there's some options, and I'm going to select both of these so we can walk through. This is where I can set the permissions, or i.e. the encryption that might go with this label. And you can imagine a top secret label, we probably want to encrypt that to provide that extra level of protection. Couple different ways you can apply permissions. I can apply it now baked into the definition of that sensitivity label, which is considered an admin defined permission label. That's what I'm going to do. Alternatively, I can not do it now and let an end user assign it when they assign the permissions when they attach the label. I'm not going to do that. That is a completely different kind of label, and typically you can have both kinds of labels. I really lean towards admin defined if you can, but sometimes you have to have the user defined permission label to deal with an edge case, an edge use case. So when you assign permissions now, you can say, I want it to expire on a specific date or after a number of days after it is applied. Never, what you may want to do if this is really a top secret document, you don't want to allow that. And then the big part on this is I want to assign permissions now. What kind of permissions do I want to assign? Lots of different options here. So if I wanted this to be just within this demo tenant, all users in here, that's the one I would do. You can, of course, do specific users or groups in your organization, specific email addresses, specific domains, working with the customer now where they are very regulated and they have a curated dynamic group of guest accounts. So that they put in a group, they really want to control that. So you could put that in this add users or groups if you have it there, and then only those people would have access to this. In addition to assigning who can have access, you need to define what can they do when they have access. So if you click choose permissions, Microsoft provides some built-in security permission templates that you can pick from that give you, they selectively pick the different options in here. So this is going to depend on how much you want to control this. So I'll just say co-author on this. Click save. Okay, so that is the permission that is now baked into this top secret sensitivity label. Content marking, this is the visual indicator. You can do a watermark, a header, or a footer. Typically, you have some kind of a naming standard, top secret, internal use only, or something like that. And same with header and footer. Yes, okay. Okay, auto labeling. So this is where you can, there's a bunch of different ways you can get a sensitivity label on, let's talk about an Office document, so a Word document. You can default it, that is done through a sensitivity label policy. You can manually apply it to a document, or you can automatically apply a document. So I'm going to click auto labeling. And you say, well, what kind of condition has to exist in that document for you to automatically apply this label? And I'm going to say content contains, and as you can see, that same, the same sensitive information types that are defined in Microsoft Purview, 300 and plus some of them, are the same sensitive information types that you can use here to automatically or recommend a sensitivity label. So, and you can use trainable classifiers as well. So I'm just going to pick sensitive information types, and let's pick something from Canada. Let's filter this list. Let's pick, we were just talking about a credit, oh no. Let's pick a credit card number. Right there, we were just talking about this, okay. So we'll pick, whenever you see a credit card number in an email or in a file, I want you to either automatically apply the label or recommend that users apply the label. When an organization is initially doing this, I always say start with recommend until you were 100% sure that this is gonna give you what you want, because there's false positives with the data that you have in your system, and it might not be exactly the match that you're anticipating there. So I'm going to say recommend they apply a top secret label, and then you can customize the message here that they get when the recommend comes in. click next. These are the settings. Sorry.
I was going to say, is there any licensing ramification of like auto labeling, or how does that work from a licensing?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to the retention label side, where if you want something to be automatically applied, I'm not sure about the default. On the retention side, you need an extra level of licensing if it's default. I'm not sure if that's true on the sensitivity label side. I think it's different on that, but certainly if you want to use this capability to automatically apply a sensitivity label, you're going to need that advanced compliance license or that one of those add-on SKUs to give you that capability, as well as the trainable classifiers. You saw that there as an option too. Yeah. Now this, what I just showed you there, would be considered client side auto apply, which is in the moment when an end user is working with the document. It's this service is running all the time in the background, scanning your content basically, and saying, I recommend this label, or I'm going to auto apply this label. You can also do it on the service side, and I will show that in a minute, and that can go out and apply content to labels to content at rest. So just to finish this, these are the protection settings for groups and sites. Once it's enabled on this tenant, I will be able to click those boxes. What it's basically controlling is the privacy of the container. So is this public or private? Will guests be allowed or not? Is external sharing allowed or not? And conditional access settings, which a couple things you can do there. You can configure what happens if you're on an unmanaged device and you hit a SharePoint site. Will you be, or a team, will you be blocked? Team site, will you be blocked? Will you be allowed to get at it, but you can only use the web interface, or can you have full access? And there's also something new called authentication context, which will allow you to perhaps, if a guest comes into a top secret site, they would be required to use MFA to have access to it.
Hey, Joanne, really quick question. For Teams, is the team container the most granular container available, or can you go down a channel?
No, you can't go down to a channel. So it would be you use, well, I'm going to back that up a little bit. With private channels and shared channels, I guess they inherit the sensitivity label of the parent team, I believe. So okay. I don't think they can be different. Last time I checked anyway. So once you set that sensitivity at a team level, certainly the standard channels within just inherit that. And then if you had a private channel that created a different SharePoint site or a shared channel, I believe they also follow the parent team. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's how that works. Unless they've changed it.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, because of course with the private channel, you get your own SharePoint site. So that
right.
would need another sensitivity label. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we won't dwell on this because again, it needs to be enabled, is you can apply a sensitivity label to data as well, not just files and emails and a container. So this is Microsoft's kind of unified approach to data protection all up across the board. And you just get a summary of it, and then you can create your label. Create that. So creating the label, similar to the retention label side, this is just a definition of a label. On its own, it doesn't really do anything. You need to publish it to end users so they can use it and see it. What this is doing is it is prompting me to do that service side auto labeling policy I was talking about. I'm not going to do that right now. I can publish it to end users through their apps. I'm going to show that, and you can just stop the process and not publish it at all. So if I want to publish the top secret label, actually, I'm going to cancel this. I want to show this a different way. Up top here, you see labels, which is what we just created. And if I go down here, you can see it added top secret at the bottom. This order matters, by the way, and it matters when there's In your client, it goes from left to right on lowest order priority to most order priority, with the most sensitive being on the right-hand side. So if you downgrade from a higher to a lower sensitivity, you're going to get justification sometimes that you're doing that. So that's why this order matters, and you can move these up and down to get the right order that you want. So if we go to label policies, you can see on this tenant, there's already some policies. There's always one global sensitivity label policy where the standard set of labels that you want published to everybody gets created. So if we go in there, you can see there are a whole bunch of labels. The ones with a label, a slash, and then another one underneath is a parent label and a sub-label. So on a file and email, once this is published to you, you can't select general, you have to select one of the sub-labels. So that's how that works. And you can see here, all of these labels are published to everybody in the organization. Now you might have a special label that you only want published to maybe the finance team. And that's what it's called, a scoped policy. So what you do here is you create a label policy that only includes those extra labels that you want that select group to have. And then this one doesn't make sense because it's publishing them to them all. But normally what happens here, you pick the label and you specify the group. So if it's finance team, hopefully there's one in this demo tenant. Yeah, so finance team is what I would pick. And then next, got some options here. This user must provide a justification to remove a label or lower its classification. This is really important. You can imagine if there's something that has a top secret label on it because there's very sensitive content. If someone were to edit that label and downgrade it to general, and it was encrypted when it was a top secret label and general isn't, they would be free, assuming there's other settings in the tenant, to share that to anybody they want. And yet the sensitive information still exists in the document. So by providing a justification, it's logged, the reason is logged. So these are some of the back-end processes that kind of go hand in hand with Microsoft Information Protection. You can make a label required. I always say if you make a label required, it's nice to also make a label default, else you're really going to be impeding an end user in the flow of their work when they're composing and sending an email and when they're building a document. So up to you to decide, but these are pretty big end user impacting decisions. You can see here.
Yeah,
you can also,
I have one partner that they have sensitivity labels that they force you to pick when you send emails, and because they don't default it, you have to always pick something every time you send a message. It drives me crazy.
It is. That's not good because it frustrates end users, and then they just end up picking some random thing. But I mean, the flip side is if you default it, you really should have some auto apply that goes along with it, else nobody is ever going to change it off the default. So it's a balancing act sometimes. I always click this one. You can build a SharePoint site on your environment that talks about all things compliance and what all the classifications mean, like the different labels and kind of what content should go in each. Put it on a modern page and then link to it in here. And I will show you where that shows up. Super easy thing to do and helpful for end users. Here's where you can make a default. So for this team, remember this is the finance team. Maybe for them, their default is confidential finance because everything they work on, it should have that label by default. They can of course change it, but you can have a different, you can have documents having a default and emails not, or vice versa, and make them the same or different. Up to you to do that. Power BI content, we're not going to talk about that. And then there's the policy. Next, submit. So I don't have a client for this guy. It will take a little bit of time for this tenant for the Office clients to pick this up, less time if you're in the Office Online product. But before we go on, and I will demo that, I wanted to show the auto labeling. This is service side auto labeling. So if you create a policy in here, you can pick a template. Let's say we want to look at anything with Canada PII data. And here you can see, you can pick Exchange, SharePoint sites, and OneDrive accounts. Select all or selective. There is a limit to this, though, in the number it will do in a day, but can't remember what it is, but it's fairly low for large tenants. So it's going to look for all of these things. I'm just going to click Next. You can get granular here if you want. And then it's saying, okay, what do I do if I find some of these things? So you can imagine there's lots of legacy content sitting out in OneDrive and SharePoint that perhaps you've had all along and you're just now publishing your sensitivity labels. So you can say, if you find any of that, I want to put a confidential all employees sensitivity label on that content automatically. And if there is existing sensitivity label on it, you have a choice on what you want to do. Maybe I want to automatically replace something that's there. And I have not seen this one. Apply encryption to email received from outside your organization. Okay. I believe it has encryption settings. Okay, so this would depend if you're for a file and email sensitivity label, if you're applying this to Exchange, then it will make the person that receives it the rights management owner. Because when you encrypt a document, it's really important that there's ownership associated with the template that's with that sensitivity label. So that is what that's demonstrating there. I haven't tested that. Okay, and you are forced to run this in simulation mode first. There's no way around this, and that's by design, because you can imagine if you get these settings wrong, let's say you're applying a sensitivity label with encryption, I mean, you can really affect a lot of content, like, you know, tens of thousands of documents. So they force you to run it in simulation mode, then you can see the net effect of what it is you just did, and then you can turn it on. I'm going to leave this turned off. Okay. So maybe I'll show what this looks like in the client. I could try going to this same tenant and see if those changes have come across. I didn't mean to go in there. I meant to go in Word. Let's create a blank document. This doesn't work. I'll go into my own tenant. Yeah, let's abandon this. Then I'm going to go into my own tenant. Okay, so I am here in Word. I'm going to actually create a new document. I was playing with this before. A new blank document. Now in this tenant, I am using the built-in client. You can also have a unified labeling client add-in that will also expose the sensitivity labels to you. But my preferred go-to is not to use that, but instead to use the add-in. So what you will notice for both clients is you're going to see a sensitivity button up here. Now this is altogether too many sensitivity labels, but I play in here all the time. So I'm not going to select one. I don't have a default label in this particular tenant. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just pick confidential. The confidential label in this particular tenant is going to encrypt it, I believe, and then add a header and a watermark. It's a very faint watermark, but you can see it there, and a header. And way down here, you can see a confidential and a lock, which means it's encrypted. So I also have an client-side auto apply going on in here. AA-11111 is a custom sensitive information type I have defined for my customer formatted number. So I'm just going to sit on this, and there is a label definition that will detect this sensitive information type and automatically, not automatically apply. Oh yeah, it did automatically apply. It didn't recommend. That yellow bar that came across is saying your organization automatically applied the sensitivity customer. We detected a customer number and have automatically applied the customer sensitivity label. And you can see the header is changed, the watermark is changed, and down here, the sensitivity label has changed, applying a different set of controls to that document simply based on the content I have within the document. That could have been a recommend as well, which I would have had to acknowledge that, yes, I accept that as well. So that's just a label setting. What else? Oh, I know. I will show. Just trying to find a SharePoint site to show you where you see this on the container side. Okay, so I'm in a site called MIP Test, and I can tell by looking at this that the classification is general. Okay, if I go to my gear settings in SharePoint and look at site information, one of the options is sensitivity. You can set this in Teams as well. I probably should have done that for this call. But what you will see here are only the sensitivity labels you have defined that apply to sites and unified groups. Okay, I'm not going to see the file and email ones in here. That's why this list is much shorter. If I click this little information icon, you can see the descriptions for each one of these sensitivity labels. This is where I say this is a shared description between what you have defined for the file and email as the container. So it needs to make sense for both.
And where does it show that URL where you said you can like navigate to get more information?
This, in fact, is a hyperlink. It's hard to know that, but if I click on the classification, which is general, here is just the page I have written for, and now this is a policy setting. So in this case, since I'm an executive, I get sent to the file and email sensitivity for executive page. And this matters because executives might get a different set of sensitivity labels than everybody else in the organization, which you would want to highlight on this page. So they've separated them out on there. So pretty easy thing to do, but I think super helpful for people.
So Joanne, what do you see as the, in terms of teams, because we focus a lot on teams, like what do you see the biggest challenges are with using sensitivity labels with teams? I mean, knowing that there's really, like from a team's perspective, there's really only two controls, you know, the public and private team setting, and then the guest access. When you look at teams, at least that's what the docs talk about, and the only two settings. But you mentioned that you could, you know, external access as well. That's really a SharePoint setting. And I'm wondering if that's an area of caution for our viewers and listeners, and that you need to be careful because if you might be applying sensitivity labels at SharePoint that prevent you from doing things in Teams.
Yes.
So maybe just talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
Good point to make, because there's an order of precedence that goes on all of these settings. So let's take guest access as one of them. You can turn guest access off at the Azure AD level, and that will override any SharePoint setting, any sensitivity label setting you have, period, full stop. If you allow it there, but you turn it off at SharePoint, same thing. If you enable it at a sensitivity label, SharePoint is saying, no, you can't, and it has guest access turned off. You can't do it at a granular level. So you have to have the right balance of settings. The most targeted and specific and I guess custom way you can do it is, let's say, allow new and existing, allow external sharing, but for new and existing guests, let's say, and then down at the sensitivity label setting, that's where you say, if you have this on, you can't share externally, even though SharePoint says I can, this team can't, and you can never be more permissive than what the level above you has. So if SharePoint Admin Center says you can only share to new and existing guests, that's all you can do. You can't do an anyone link to anybody. So it requires a lot of thoughtful planning, really, to figure out what is the right combination of settings, what's the base level that you want to set at the SharePoint admin, and then what will we allow down at the team level, at the more granular level. Yeah, that's a good point to make.
That's good. Thank you.
Quick question, similar to Dino's question. I was going to ask what the top use cases you see with your clients for sensitivity labels are. And wild guess, it's probably governing access to content. So do you find people or organizations are more interested in, restricting access to guests or restricting access to the distribution of information, or any common themes there that organizations in certain industries tend to gravitate towards?
Okay, that's a good question. Access controls are huge for, lots of organizations are, on sensitive information. It's on a need to know basis. So how do you control that access? Right. Privacy is a huge one. So making sure you have the right protection controls on anything that has any PII on it. It is another big one. Really controlling that guest access and external sharing in a very, I guess, well thought out way. And there's, I'm going to just talk about user defined permissions for a moment. The way that works is, let's say you're sending an email, and like there is a good use case for it, because you don't always know who you want to share something to. Okay, so if you want to use a user defined permission label, whoever you have on the to line of the email, in fact, gets the permission. So that's an easy way for end users to do it. But protect, and then they can control the protection on it. But that's putting a lot of onus on an end user to do the right thing there. And there's other problems with the user-defined permission label. So most organizations are looking for those big common use cases in their organization, prioritizing them, and then kind of, starting with the big ones, and then trying to kind of chip away at how can we implement the controls kind of incrementally over time to improve it, because you aren't going to be able to cover off all of those use cases on day one. But most organizations have after you have a discoverability phase and you see what's going on across your environment, we've got people storing credit card numbers on their OneDrive or whatever the thing is. I mean, it oftentimes is what is the driving factor, the driving force for determining what's the biggest risk and the biggest hole, and what do we need to try to stop right now.
So my second follow-up question, I think you just answered, but feel free to add any more color. I was going to ask you, what are the top challenges organizations have right across the board, just trying to implement sensitivity labels. I think it's probably identifying what content in their ecosystem is restricted, private,
Yes.
and that whole taxonomy, right? That probably, I'm guessing that's really difficult.
Yeah, it is. And if you think about it, in a lot of companies are coming at this after there's already a lot of content in M365. So they've already got sometimes thousands of teams and thousands of SharePoint sites and documents that are out there. And in the discoverability phase, which is what I am showing now on my mind map for information protection, that's where all of that stuff comes to light. You start to see what end users are doing and where they're storing some of that sensitive content. So, even if you come up with based on your data classification scheme, if you come up with a taxonomy for your files and emails and your containers, well, then what? You need to apply those to not only net news sites that you're doing, but how are you going to wrangle the existing content that you have out there? Apply the right, if there's a highly sensitive team, making sure that team gets the appropriate sensitivity label put on it, so the right level of controls are made. So this is not an easy problem to solve, unfortunately, and operationalizing information protection is huge. Like, let's take applying a sensitivity label to a team. Is a team owner can change it. So, okay, that's a risk. So what do you do about that? Do you limit who can change that sensitivity label? Or do you just let a team owner do it, and then every quarter, every year, you just review what all the sensitivity labels are across your teams? I mean, it's up to organizations to figure that out, but it is a really big and important aspect of not only figuring out what it is we want to protect and how we're going to do it, but dealing with all of the legacy content as well. So that's part of this. That's part of the roadmap at the end, is operationalizing it is huge. Once you've gone through all of the other parts to figure out the classification scheme and your settings.
I love to point out the quantity of sub items at each of these layers is like 50 plus, 80 plus.
It is.
On some of these. So I'm sure the viewers can't zoom in as much, but taking a look at that, you can see like the undertaking it must be to go through all this.
There's a lot going on there. And of course, there's a lot of tech, but this is one space where it's as much about, privacy regulations, legal implications, risk, auditors. There's so much going on here, and so many touch points with other parts of the organization. Cybersecurity is one and then the tech. If I open up the tech, it's got 86 there. Purview MIP technologies. You can see here, sensitivity labels is one of them. Okay, so they all go together under the broad umbrella of Microsoft information protection, and there's a lot going on there. Of course, you don't have to touch all of these things. It depends what it is you're protecting, right? Today, we were talking about Office apps and Microsoft 365 apps, but that it can extend far beyond that into on-prem, like locations, other cloud apps. So it can get, it can balloon out quickly. So I'll just close that. Yeah. So this is what I go through, and at the end of it all, you get a roadmap and go to town.
Well, I was going to make a joke. If I was about to embark on this for a reasonable size organization, I think the first thing I'd want is a consultant that had been through it, right?
Yes.
I mean, just having the knowledge to know all this, like how to navigate it for my organization would be step one. So there's lots of little gotchas there that they're not insurmountable if you do them or forget to do them, but it just can make your life a lot easier if you know some of these things before you start down this path, particularly if you're a large tenant and you've got a lot of content. Once the label gets on a document,
And if you want to change certain things about that label, after the fact, it can be problematic. Yeah.
All right. Well, Joanne, you've been really generous with your time, and we really appreciate it. So we'll cap it there. And you know what I love best about talking to you and your demos is it's a voice of experience, which for this subject matter really helps. And having not gone through that UI and done the setup for a while, it was really great to see it end to end. So thank you very much for that.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to join the Canadian crew.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks again, Joanne, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.